was not supposed to survive that day, and I was definitely not supposed to remember it like this. I was 14 years old when I first saw him. He was not yet what he would become. No statues, no laurel, no divine title carved above his name. He was just a man walking through the market near the Sabura, without guards, without ceremony, buying olives from a Syrian vendor who spoke the same dialect as my mother. That vendor was my uncle. Caesar stopped. He tasted one olive, then another. He asked the price in Greek. My uncle answered in our tongue, testing him as merchants do. Caesar smiled and answered back in the same dialect, rough, imperfect, but real. He had learned it from soldiers, from the campaigns, from listening. That was the first thing I understood about him. He always listened. My uncle mentioned that I was quick with languages, that I could write in 3 hands. Caesar looked at me the way a man looks at a tool he did not know he needed. Not unkindly, just with that particular Roman assessment, measuring, filing, deciding. "Can the boy keep a secret?" he asked my uncle. My uncle laughed. "He has kept mine for 6 years. Caesar nodded once. That was my contract. That was my entire hiring process. I followed him home that afternoon carrying a basket of olives and a bundle of correspondence he had purchased from a courier near the Forum. I never left his service, not for 22 years. People ask me what he was really like. They want the god. They want the conqueror. They want the man who made kings kneel and legions march through freezing rivers on a single command. I give them what I actually knew. He hated the cold in his feet. Every winter he had me warm stones in the brazier and wrap them in cloth and place them under his desk while he worked. He never told anyone. He considered it a weakness. He considered most human comforts to be weaknesses, and yet he could not write without warm feet. He ate almost nothing at formal dinners. Senators would feast around him while he pushed food across his plate, engaged in conversation, watching. I learned to leave a simple plate of bread and cheese in his private room for after. He ate there, alone, quickly, like a soldier. That was when he was most himself. In those silent minutes, bread in hand, sandals off, the performance of Caesar put down like a mask. He was afraid of one thing only. Not death, not battle. He had proved that 1,000 times in Gaul, in Spain, crossing the Rubicon in the dark with 1 legion when any sensible man would have stopped. He was afraid of being ordinary. Every morning, before anything else, he stood at the window and looked out over Rome as if reminding himself that it was still there, that he had not dreamed it. I watched him do this for 2 decades. He never seemed entirely sure the city was real. That is not the kind of detail that ends up in histories, but it is the kind of detail that makes a man human, and it is the kind of detail that makes what happened to him so much harder to carry.
Chapter 2. When the world bent to him. The years in Gaul changed him. Not broke him, that is too simple. They compressed him, as if the campaigns had taken everything soft in him and burned it down to something harder and more concentrated, like iron reduced to a blade. I was not with him in Gaul for all of it. I stayed mostly in Rome, managing his correspondence, his household affairs, the careful web of messages that kept his political alliances from unraveling in his absence. But when I saw him return, I knew something had shifted. He walked differently. Not with arrogance. He was never arrogant in the way small men are arrogant. It was something quieter. A man who has stared at the limit of human endurance and decided that the limit was further than anyone had told him. His soldiers loved him beyond reason. I watched a man, a veteran, broad-shouldered, scarred from chin to ear, weep openly when Caesar rode past him during a triumph. Not from sentiment, from gratitude. Caesar had given him something no general gives a common soldier, the feeling that he mattered, that he was seen. Caesar knew every centurion by name, not as a political strategy, though it served as one. He genuinely remembered. He would ask after a man's injury from 2 years prior. he would remember the name of a soldier's brother back in Mediolanum. This was not performance. I was with him in the private moments. There was no audience for this memory except the men themselves. Rome received him like a wave receives a shore. The people adored him. The crowds pressed forward just to touch the edge of his procession. Children were lifted on shoulders. Women threw flowers that were crushed immediately under the feet of the crowd. And yet, in the private evenings, after the triumphs, after the celebrations had stretched past midnight, I would find him at his desk, writing, always writing. Histories of his own campaigns, letters to men in provinces he had not yet conquered, plans for roads and aqueducts and calendar reforms that would reshape how Rome measured time itself. He never rested, not once. Not a single evening of pure stillness. I asked him once, gently, why. He looked up from the papyrus. His eyes were tired in the way only very driven men get tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of their own ambitions. "Because there is still so much to do," he said. "And because the moment I stop, Lucian, is the moment they remember that I am only a man." I did not understand it then. I understand it now, in a way that costs me sleep. He was right. The moment they remembered he was only a man, they killed him.
Chapter 3. The Cracks Before the Fall. It is a strange thing to feel something ending before it ends. The winter before the Ides of March, something changed in the texture of the days. I cannot point to one moment. It was more like the air before a storm. Nothing visible, but everything felt. The light slightly wrong. The silences between conversations lasting a beat too long. I began to notice things. Men who had dined at Caesar's table every month stopped accepting invitations. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious. One by one, quietly, like flames being pinched out before anyone notices the room growing darker. Gaius Trebonius, who had fought beside Caesar in Gaul. Marcus Brutus, who Caesar had pardoned after Pharsalus. Elevated, trusted, loved in the particular way Caesar loved men who were worth the loving. They were still present, still smiling, but there was a new quality to their stillness when Caesar spoke. A listening that was not about what he was saying, but about what he might say next. I noticed. I did not know what I was noticing. Not yet. Caesar noticed too. I believe that. He was too observant a man not to feel the shift. But he did something I now think was his only true failure. He decided not to see it. There were warnings. A soothsayer near the Forum, Spurina they called him, stopped Caesar in the street and told him to beware the Ides of March. Caesar was not a superstitious man. He thanked the man with the polite attachment of someone humoring a child, and walked on. I was 3 steps behind him. I watched Spurina watch Caesar walk away. The old man did not look like a fool who had been dismissed. He looked like a man who had done everything he could. Calpurnia dreamed. I was not in their chambers, but the household whispered in the way households do. She dreamed of blood. She dreamed of his statue and of wounds. She woke him before dawn and begged him not to go to the Senate meeting on the 15th. She held his arm. I heard this from his doorman, who heard it through the wall. Caesar told her it was a dream, only a dream. There was a letter. This is the part history does not carry, or carries too gently to be felt. A letter was pressed into Caesar's hand on the morning of the Ides by a philosopher named Artemidorus, who somehow knew, somehow had the names, the plan, the hour. The letter was placed in Caesar's palm, and Caesar took it and held it, and, surrounded by men pressing forward, men greeting him, men clapping his shoulder and steering him gently,
always gently, toward the theater of Pompey. He never read it. I was behind him. I watched the letter pass from hand to hand in the crowd until I could no longer see it. I should have called out. I should have pushed forward. I should have said, "Read it, please. Stop and read it." I did not. That is the weight I have carried for 18 years. That is the thing I cannot put down.
Chapter 4. The Morning of the Ides. The 15th of March arrived like any other morning. That is the cruelest detail. No darkness at dawn, no silence in the streets. The city was simply the city. Vendors shouting, cartwheels grinding on stone, the smell of bread from the bakeries near the Tiber. Rome did not know. Rome was just alive, the way cities are alive, indifferent and enormous and ordinary. Caesar dressed without hurry. I helped him with his toga, as I did every formal day. The senatorial toga, white, with its stripe of deep red along the edge. I had dressed him this way hundreds of times. My hands knew the weight of the fabric. He stood still while I worked, looking at nothing in particular, his expression the same composed mask he wore before any public appearance. But his hands were cold. I noticed because I touched them, adjusting a fold of fabric. Cold and slightly still, in the way hands are still when a man is managing something inside himself. "Are you well?" I asked. I said it quietly, without significance, the way you might ask a friend on any morning. He looked at me then, really looked, in a way that was not his public face, not Caesar the dictator, not Caesar the imperator, just the man, the one who ate bread alone in the dark, the one who warmed his feet with heated stones. "I am tired, Lucian," he said. That was all. He pulled his toga straight, squared his shoulders, and became Caesar again. I followed him out into the street. The walk to the theater was short but crowded. Men greeted him constantly, peeling away from the sides of the road to approach, to speak, to be seen near him. Caesar acknowledged them with the practiced grace of a man who had spent a lifetime being watched. I stayed close enough to hear him speak, close enough to see the men who were walking near him, men who had planned something for which there is no adequate word. Brutus was there. He walked just ahead, occasionally turning back to speak, smiling that careful smile of his. I had known Brutus for years. He was a good man, a genuinely good man, and that is the thing about it that I cannot make simple. He believed what he was doing was right. That is not an excuse. It is something worse than an excuse. It is a truth that makes the whole thing impossible to carry neatly. Trebonius peeled away from the group near the entrance to the theater. He took Mark Antony by the arm. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal second, his protector, and engaged him in conversation just outside, keeping him there, keeping him away. I watched this happen. I did not know what I was watching. I know now. The steps of the theater, the columns, the gathered senators inside, rising as Caesar entered, that ancient deference, that formal acknowledgement of power. And then one of them approached, Julius Caesar, a petition in his hand and a name on his lips, his brother, exiled, begging Caesar's clemency. A pretense, a reason to move close. Caesar gestured, preparing to give his usual answer, the measured refusal of a man who cannot grant every mercy in public without cost. Cimber reached up, took Caesar's toga by the shoulder, pulled it down. The signal.
Chapter 5. 23 Wounds. The first blade was Casca's. He came from the side, and the stroke was not clean. It caught Caesar at the neck, shallow, more shock than wound. Caesar grabbed the blade. His hand bled immediately. He turned, and on his face was something I had never seen in 22 years of watching him. Pure human disbelief. Not fear, not Caesar. Disbelief. This is happening. This is actually happening. Then they were all moving. I cannot give you the scene in clean order because it did not happen in clean order. It happened the way violence happens, all at once, too fast, in a space that suddenly had no air in it. Togas moving, the sound of iron, men crowding forward, each needing to be part of it, each needing to be implicated equally so no single blade could bear the full weight. I was frozen in the doorway. I need you to understand that. I was a servant. I was unarmed. I was one man against 60 conspirators, and I was frozen. And I have spent 18 years deciding whether that makes me a coward or simply a man. I have not decided yet. Caesar fought. This surprises people when I tell them, but he fought. He was not a young man, but his body remembered legions, remembered Gaul, remembered 100 desperate moments. He struggled, turned, tried to break through. He struck back at Casca. He pulled his toga up over his head, not in surrender, but to fall with dignity, they say. And I believe this, because it was exactly the thing Caesar would think to do. Even then, even in that moment, managing how he would be seen. He fell near the base of a statue, Pompey's statue. This is the thing historians record and audiences find poetic, that Caesar died at the feet of his greatest rival. I was there. I do not find it poetic. I find it unbearable. He lay on cold marble at the foot of a man he had defeated, and the senators scrambled backward from what they had done, and the hall became suddenly, utterly still. 23 wounds. The physicians said afterward that only one was truly fatal, the second blow to the chest, which found the heart's direction. The others were almost political, each man proving his part, each blade a vote. He made no great speech. He spoke no final Latin words for monuments. This is what history softened. At the end, his eyes found something above the gathered faces, above the statues and the marble ceiling, and whatever he saw or did not see, he took it with him. Then he was simply still. And Rome did not know yet. Outside, bread was being sold. Children were running. The Tiber was moving toward the sea the way it always moved. I stood in the doorway. I could not go forward. I could not go back. I stood there until a slave came and pulled at my arm and told me I needed to run. And I ran. And I did not stop until I was past the Forum, past the market, past every place I had ever walked beside him. Chapter 6. What we buried and what we did not. I never went back to his house. There was nothing to go back to. Not because the house was gone. It stood for years afterward, absorbed into the machinery of Rome's next chapter. The way everything Caesar built was either destroyed by his enemies or stolen by his heirs. But because I could not walk through those rooms, could not pass the desk where he wrote, could not see the brazier where I heated stones for his feet. I left Rome within the week. I went east, back toward Antioch, back toward the language my mother spoke, back toward the world that had existed before a Roman general stopped at my uncle's market stall and looked at a 14-year-old boy and decided he needed someone who could keep a secret. I kept his secrets well. I kept them so well that when they came looking, and they did come looking, the new men, the ones who needed to own the story of what had happened, I had become invisible. A servant no one had thought to write down, a name in no record, a ghost with a living body. That is how I survived. I am an old man now. My hands shake in the cold, which is its own particular irony. I heat stones in the brazier and wrap them in cloth and feel the warmth spread through my palms, and I think of him every single time. I think of what history made him, the marble, the myth, the fixed point around which empires pivot. And then I think of what I knew. A man who could not write without warm feet. A man who ate bread alone in the dark. A man who stood at a window every morning as if checking that Rome was still real. A man who was tired on the last morning and said so only to me, and then straightened his shoulders and walked out into the sunlight to die among men he had trusted. They ask, was Caesar a great man? I cannot answer that. Greatness is for histories, and I have told you what I think of histories. I can only tell you what I know. He was the most alive person I ever stood near. Every room he entered became more real. Every conversation he engaged became more urgent. He made the world feel like it meant something, the way very few people can, the way no one else I have encountered in all the years since has ever made me feel. And then he was gone, and the world has felt slightly less real ever since. I should not have told you this. They built a city on the story they chose to tell, and the story they chose has no room for what I saw in that doorway, no room for the letter he never read, no room for cold hands and warm stones, and a man who was simply tired on the morning the world ended. But I was there. I was always there. And now, at last, so are you. Here ends the testimony of Lucian of Antioch. What became of him after this document was set down is not known. It was never meant to be known.